Hello and welcome again to another episode of Vintage Pens for the Modern User. Today we are going to explore a vintage pen made by Eversharp in the 1940s. This model was called the Eversharp Skyline, and it took its design cues from the streamlined freight trains, or really streamlined passenger trains, the locomotives that Henry Dreyfuss designed. He also designed this pen, and if you were to compare a picture of these streamlined locomotives for the New York Central Railroad to the pen itself, you could easily see some similarities of design. A very nice Art Deco streamlined pattern here, and they make excellent writers, which, as you know, my goal with vintage pens for the modern user is to encourage those of you who like to use your pens every day to really explore the value of vintage pens as a daily writing instrument. After all, that's what these pens were originally designed for. There were no ballpoints in the era or other really pen ink type writing instruments. If you wanted to write, you either used a fountain pen or a pencil. And for those of us who love to put ink to paper, I think you should really give a vintage pen a try. So let's dive in and take a closer look at what makes the vintage Eversharp Skyline such a unique writing instrument. So here I have before you a nice tray of a few of the examples of the Eversharp Skyline fountain pen. These pens were made in 1940 is when they were introduced by the company, designed by Henry Dreyfuss. You can find them in a variety of colors, both solid and striped. When Eversharp began making this pen, there was a transition between celluloid pens and a new polystyrene plastic that could be molded. Now, the polystyrene plastics are probably the more common ones that you would find in colors like gray, burgundy, black, green, and navy blue. They also had some things to be aware of because the plastic did not have great longevity if it was exposed to some adverse conditions. And you would sometimes find that there could be bulging of the barrel around where the lever is, or shrinkage in the plastic within the cap. So those are some pitfalls of the design and things to look for. But one of the purposes of vintage pens for the modern user is to give you examples of some good pens that write well and by and large are easily found and not expensive and can be restored and used very reliably for a long period of time. So this is the example before you. We see here, these pens are the celluloid pens. They did still use celluloid, and they are striped. They are very elegantly, those are the 5 color options that were available. They also did some metal overlays on the pens. Most commonly found is this striped one here. There are some fine ridge lines going longitudinally around the pen. Then we have some stripes that go horizontally on the pen, and then we have a very uncommon sort of dart pattern that was borrowed from earlier machine-turned wall pens from the 1920s. We also find pens with plastic barrels and these caps, which again could have some of these patterns on them, and even occasionally they did make pens with solid gold caps or fully covered solid gold caps and barrels. So let's take a closer look at the design elements and write with one of these fountain pens. Again, I'm a very big advocate that using one of these fountain pens daily is an easy thing to do and something that modern users should really give a try. The lever filling mechanism of a fountain pen is one of the most basic ways to fill a fountain pen. It's very reliable and it's very easy to use. So let's jump in and use one of these. So the pen here I have before us does have the plastic, again, polystyrene barrel. This has a nice latitudinally striped cap here. And sometimes you will find the derby, this is the portion at the top part of the cap, will also be covered with metal, or it may be a plastic that matches the plastic of the barrel. Because of the construction of these caps, I often advise users when you unscrew or uncap a pen that you actually hold it at the top by the derby rather than down here. There are threads here where this portion is connected to the derby. And sometimes, because again, this plastic can have some issues with shrinking, you can wind up with some loosened threads here, and turning down here, potentially over time, this portion can wind up spinning and becoming loose. So if we turn up here at the top of the derby, we will always have a very guaranteed way of removing the cap from the pin. You can see this streamlined design once it's posted. It's very comfortable in the hand. Now this pin is the standard size pin. Skylines were made in 3 different sizes. The Demi, which was slightly smaller, shorter in length than the pin I have here. The Standard, which I have in front of me, and the Executive, which was slightly larger. All 3 sizes are available, although the Executive is a bit harder to come by. The Standard is probably most commonly found, and the Demis are out there pretty easily found as well. So they come apart, cap comes apart very easily. Basic construction of a lever filler. We have a section here that can be removed. There is a sack inside. Skyline did put a breather tube in these pins. And as a result, the instructions say that you should work the lever mechanism a few times rather than just one time. So let us work the lever mechanism. Let us fill this fine pin with ink and enjoy discovering how it writes. So I have a bottle of Waterman's ink. I always recommend when using a vintage pen that you seek out an ink that is well known for its reliability, that's been around for a while. Waterman inks have been around for a long time. They are tried and true. There are, of course, others. Just avoid inks that are highly saturated. Certainly, you don't want to put any inks that have any sort of sediment type components in it, glitter, those sorts of things you can find with some modern inks. So be cautious about what inks you put in your vintage pens, but there are a lot out there that are perfectly suitable. One of the things I like about the Waterman inkwell is that you can tip it on its side, so as it gets low, you can use it sort of to the last drop. Now these levers can be a little bit tricky, especially if your fingernails are trimmed, but they can be operated up and down. You'll hear the ink go in and out, and you'll have to do it multiple times to get it really full. I'm just going to do it once here because we're doing a short writing demonstration. But you can see, of course, how that lever mechanism operates. Pretty straightforward. Put the cap back on the inkwell always and forevermore so that we don't have any spills. Post the pen. It is a little more comfortable to write with the cap posted, but it balances very nicely. And away we go. So we have here the Eversharp Skyline. By this time in the company's history, the name Wall was pretty well dropped, although you will find some of these where the name Wall is still on the clip of the cap. It's less common, but they still wanted to continue to have that Wall name trademarked, and so occasionally you'll find them, but most of the time you'll just see Eversharp at this point in company history. 1940, this is a standard size pen. And it's got rather a wet feed, a nice smooth nib. This particular nib is a rigid nib, but it's very smooth. Skyline just really knew what they were doing, as did many vintage pen manufacturers. Again, these pens had to be used every day, and so the nibs were really tuned well. You can find these, fine, medium, extra fine, broad, and you can find them rigid. But you can also find them, broad. They may have stub nibs, which are quite delightful. I used to have one, can't find it right now, might have sold it. They have, even a little bit of an italic to them. And then some of the nice things about the Skylines is you can often find them with flexible nibs still. So you can find, fine, medium, broads, even italics that have a flexible quality to them, which by the 1940s was less common to find in US manufacturers. So you have a lot of writing options with the nibs on these pens. They're not terribly expensive to pick up. They are still reliable, even with the things I mentioned looking for as some cautions with the plastics. Again, as always, seek to find one of these pens that has been restored already. If you're new to vintage pens and you want to write with them every day, make sure to pick up one from a reliable dealer who can ensure that your pen is going to write the best possible way, function the best possible way. And many people who sell vintage pens that have been restored as dealers do offer a limited warranty on those pens, usually for at least a year, perhaps 2, so that you can be reassured that you're really getting a good quality writing instrument and you can enjoy it. The Skylines are great pens. I often recommend them to people who are looking up to pick up a first vintage pen. There's no reason not to grab one. Again, some lovely celluloid colors here. We have some lovely metal here that we can have, and even some really luxurious solid gold pens. So the Eversharp Skyline makes a wonderful everyday writing instrument, and I do hope you will seek one out and give it a try.